Richard is in this category of great man narratives, something that we are trying to move away from.
Many people know that he was an explorer, he was a Victorian, he was a man, and therefore assume everything he did and thought was negative.
Thing they read is that Somalis are liars.
His story doesn't exist without her.
I think it's the quality of the man that really matters.
This is what makes him such a complicated character.
Born in 1821 in Torquay, southwest England, Richard Francis Burton was one of the most remarkable and most intriguing figures of the Victorian age. He spoke many languages. He disguised himself as a Muslim pilgrim and entered the holiest sites in Islam. He explored East Africa, mapped the source of the Nile, and translated the Arabian Nights and the Kama Sutra into English for the first time. He was a soldier, a spy, a poet, and an anthropologist, to name just a few. The British establishment never quite knew what to do with him, and neither has history. This film is about why that question still matters, and why the answer depends entirely on who you ask.
You see, up until recently, Burton was almost universally viewed through Western lens, or Eurocentric lens, if you like. In other words, the lens of people whose ancestors, family, and nations largely benefited from what Burton got up to, or in some way, shape, or form enjoyed the fruits of his efforts. I think it's very different when you look at Burton from, say, the perspective of a Muslim, or a South Asian, or an African. He engaged with cultures in all of those categories. The relationship somebody like myself, who is of South Asian Muslim descent, has with Burton is very similar to the relationship I have with Britain. I have to wrangle with Britain's colonial past and the way it affected my ancestors, whilst also acknowledging that I love Britain today and I benefit hugely from everything that we have in this country. And those two opposing moments, they never go away for somebody like me, and I have to carry them. And of course, at times people will want you to be one or the other, but the reality is you can't. You have to hold both. After being born in Torquay, the family tended to move around quite a bit. This is really when the desire to travel becomes kind of fixed in Burton, but also his experimentation with language, because we understand that in those early years, living on the continent, he's got quite the skill for language.
When he encountered a culture, he wanted to really immerse himself into it to fully understand it. So he would learn the language. He spoke at least 25 languages fluently. He would adopt the local dress, adopt the local customs. He would live amongst the people.
It's quite apparent from both his early years and later on during his time at the University of Oxford that he often got himself into scraps. He liked to challenge people. Probably quite fair to say that he also displayed a kind of disdain for authority at a very early age as well. Obviously gets himself kicked out of the University of Oxford. And I think that personality trait continues.
He was very bold, curious. He studied deeply. He wanted to learn, and he respectfully questioned authority. If you like, a rebel with a purpose.
It's also what makes him such a complicated character, because whilst this project and many modern commentators on Burton and others like him are looking at his work, his legacy, and looking at the way in which it was utilised by the British imperial movement, how it allowed the colonisation of certain parts of the world, it's also obvious and apparent from Burton's life that he didn't entirely agree with all of this. This is what makes him such a complicated character.
He was an anthropologist before it was even a recognised discipline. I think that resonates today, that if you really want to understand a culture, you really have to immerse yourself in it and not just sit on the sidelines taking notes.
interested in people, the way people lived, the way they thought. And he said, nothing opens a man's heart more than speaking to him in his own tongue.
He made use of every minute he was traveling. He was observing, writing. Nothing was unimportant. Everything was important. A bed, a flower, a tree, a voice, the clouds, the wind, animals. His title, Captain Richard Burton, shows who he was, that he was a member of the army. He came to survey and give 2 reports, one to the Royal Geographical Society and one to the British government.
And this is what made him different from the typical British explorer. That is, he went with an open mind and a genuine interest in learning about and from the people he met.
In 1853, Burton did something that would define his legend, and depending on your perspective, his dishonour. He disguised himself as a Muslim pilgrim and performed the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca. He entered the Kaaba itself, places non-Muslims are not supposed to be.
There was an element of reinforcing the colonial project, the imperial project, in just a more seductive way, in a way that clearly appealed to Burton's character and personality of becoming somebody else. He had a variety of personas throughout his life, both for professional reasons of deception and infiltration, but also just in his writing. Sometimes you read his work, you do ask yourself, is this the same person? He often played up to one personality, and then at times he played up to the other. So in that respect, you could see he was also manipulating his audience as well.
In the local museum inside the old town hall in Richmond, many of Burton's personal diaries, papers and items are on display.
I'm really super excited about touching these particular shoes because, of course, it is believed that Burton would have worn these when he went off to perform his infamous Hajj pilgrimage in 1853. Now, this was a pilgrimage that he performed disguised as a Muslim, as is the popular opinion, pretending to be a dervish, which is a Sufi mystic. And when he went off to perform this Hajj, he reputedly wore these very shoes. And of course, it's the Hajj, the 1853 Hajj, that makes him the great explorer, the great daredevil Victorian man that he would later come to embody for everybody else. Because after performing that Hajj, he writes it up as a pilgrimage and it becomes one of the best sellers. And of course, it's those books that offer, you could argue, authentic first-hand narrative for Victorian society about the most sacred rituals of Muslims, and they come to almost define what those rituals were for Muslims, something that has problems but also at the time was probably one of the most authentic examples of that. The vast majority view his Hajj as being insincere and an act of imperial espionage, if you like, a space that Muslims believe we only go to when we're invited. The Hajj is considered by Muslims to be a rehearsal for death, to metaphorically confront God. When you put that into perspective, suddenly Burton's Hajj is hugely disrespectful. And to know that this man was able to do something, who wasn't even a sincere Muslim, was able to engage in one of the most privileged acts any Muslim in humanity could have taken part in, I was both upset but also excited by his description of it. When I was researching the Hajj, Burton's Hajj narrative became a wonderful resource. And when I first encountered it, I was so excited by the fact that I had this window into a world that is long gone. What he describes is whilst he's inside the Kaaba, where he claims he felt like a trapped rat because of how tiny the space was, how many Muslims there were, and the fact that he was very conscious that he wasn't a Muslim in this very sacred space. He then describes how he used a pencil to etch the plan of the Kaaba on his ihram in a kind of very clandestine way. Whether it was written because it was entertainment for an audience and actually did or didn't happen, reading it now, it makes it very difficult to then suggest this was someone who in that moment saw himself as a sincere Muslim.
The year after the Hajj, Burton led an expedition into what is now Somalia and Somaliland. He travelled with a small group of local guides and was hosted by Somali chiefs, including a man called Ali Adar. He was mapping the territory for the British government, and he was watching everything.
He says these savages believe that mosquito and my river have relationship. But maybe our scientists will, after 100 years, is just joking. He said, maybe after 100 years, our scientists will prove it. However, Dr. Ross, who was the British company in India, read his journal, experimented and found that really what Richard Burton wrote was correct. And he won, I think, in 1902, he won a prize, I think Nobel Prize, for discovering the relationship between mosquito and malaria.
Burton, like a lot of Victorians, was clearly fascinated by the possibility of a spiritual world, the possibility of engaging directly with the unseen. Of course, this is famously where we get the genie from. And Burton's work is probably one of the first, through his Arabian Nights work, for example, where this entity is introduced to Western culture for the first time.
So you see here, the title of this particular excerpt is The Tale of the Trader and the Jinni.
Of course, genie in the Western imagination has evolved into this wonderful mythological caricature almost, whereas for Muslims, the concept of the jinn is a very real thing. I think when Burton sees that within Islam there is also a spiritual dimension or a way in which you can practice Islam in a spiritual manner, this would have been deeply appealing for somebody like him. But also as someone who wanted to explore how these faiths were practiced, we understand that he also engages with mystical Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism. So we know he's exploring all of these, but the one that seems to stick with him and the one that he claims to have engaged with on such a level that he is embraced by an actual Sufi order. He describes various moments in his life where he engages with Sufi rituals, with Sufi practices, and even his wife ends up describing him as a Catholic Sufi or a Sufi Catholic.
Orleans House in Richmond holds part of the Burton collection. Artefacts, photographs and documents from many lives lived across 4 continents. Tharik Hussain and Father Adrian, the priest of St Mary Magdalene Roman Catholic Church, where Richard was laid to rest, came here together, a Muslim historian and a Catholic priest, to look at what remains.
By choosing to take on this Sufi path, that was part of his journey then. As controversial as it is, I would see him as a person of faith, upholding various traditions and trying to, in his own way, be respectful to both. There are times when he, in his writings, obviously seems to disagree with every religion.
Nothing Burton encountered was off limits. He documented sex and desire with the same meticulous attention he gave to botany, language, and religious ritual. For a society that could not speak openly about any of it, his translations were scandalous, compulsive, and enormously profitable.
So when somebody like Burton is publishing these books, he knew he couldn't do this in a public domain, so it was done secretly by subscription and for the privileged classes. And the way in which sexuality was being discussed in some of these texts was of course deeply shocking, but also very, very exciting for high Victorian society, which is why they very quickly became bestsellers. But what it also did, of course, because of the way in which Burton embellished and projected his own sexual inclinations, his own fantasies and desires, it then led to caricatures and problematic representations of those cultures. But in that moment, I guess it was the equivalent of modern pornography. And to have naked images of a woman in a book during Victorian England was obviously very, very risque, which is why it had to be published by subscription only. In all my time travelling through Muslim lands, I've never encountered scenes like these. But of course, if you were a person living in Victorian England and you'd never been to the Arabian countries or you'd never been to Muslim lands, then you would start to assume that this is what you would come upon. The images here, which are of course the most powerful aspect of a book like this, they leave the reader assuming that Muslims and Arabs had a preoccupation with sex.
Burton's writing came with a cost that his Victorian readers, and potentially today's too, never considered. For the Somali people, a single misunderstanding, written down, published, repeated, became a label that has never gone away. Burton's expedition journals became published books, read across Britain and Europe. What he wrote about the people he met became, for many readers, the only account of those people that existed.
When they were in the Harawa Valley, he asked them, are there elephants in the area? And they said yes. However, what he didn't know was, during the wet season, they come to Hamal, almost to the desert. For him, it was a lie. It was November and December when he was with Ali, 1854. It was a dry season. He called them liars, and he put that in his book. Had he stayed for 1 year, he would have understood. The last elephant that died 1954, it is on the record. And every scholar wanted to know about Somalis. The first thing they read is that Somalis are liars. So that's what Richard Burton wrote.
By 1890, encyclopedias were defining Somalis as liars and thieves, a label built on one dry season and a man who called what he didn't understand a lie. This was the power of the written word at the time, especially when it was written by a white British man. What he wrote down as fact about something he didn't really understand 175 years ago still has an impact today. The same man who embedded those distortions was also, quietly, one of the most meticulous scientific observers of his age. During 2 expeditions to the mountainous northwest of Saudi Arabia, he collected nearly 170 plant specimens, the first ever gathered from that region by a European. They are still at Kew Gardens today.
So it was described by Oliver as Farsetia is a species belonging to the genus Farsetia, of which there are several species in that region. It's quite a pretty plant. It's not an ugly-looking plant at all. It's very pretty. And he called it after Burton. So it's called Farsetia burtoni. And he described it in Iconis plantarum, which is the original description of it. And he writes at the end that with this interesting new Farsetia, the name Captain Burton's most efficient and enthusiastic helpmate may well be associated, just so that the name actually goes, because he was so, he's collected this plant. This whole sheet is the new species. So he says, and noted extremely well, he says that, let me here warn collectors of botany in Midian that throughout the land, the vegetable kingdom follows the rule of mineral. Every march shows something new, and he who neglects to gather specimens, especially of the smaller flowers in one valley, will perhaps find none of them in those adjoining. All the observations that he makes as far as the botanical specimens are concerned are pretty accurate. I mean, the things that he writes about the plants where the bees have come or where people sit or, what the fragrance it gives. Those are also observations that are quite acute.
I admire him as a scholar. He reached a level where religion was not important.
Whether he was actually confirmed a Catholic when he died or whether he was a Muslim, I don't really think matters. I think it's the quality of the man that really matters.
We should try to separate Burton himself from people's ideas about Burton. If you look into his life, read what he wrote, what he said, read some of the poems. That's the real Burton, if you like. Too many people just look at the name Burton, Captain Richard Burton, know that he was an explorer, know that he was a Victorian, know that he was a man, and therefore assume that everything he did, said and thought was automatically negative. So I think that's an important thing to separate. The man and his life, and I would say his achievements, from the image that people have given him.
And so why is it important that we still remember and reanalyse who this man was and what his legacy was?
It's important from a women's history point of view and from feminist retellings of stories, and especially because Richard is in this category of great man narratives, which is something that we are trying to move away from. I mean, you can still tell their stories, they're still important, but recontextualising them with the people that surrounded them. Richard was not a man that existed on his own. When he does these expeditions, he's not alone, just him and a machete cutting through the jungle. He is with loads of guides. He's with indigenous, local African people who help him to get to the source of the Nile. He was not able to do all of these things alone, and Isabel is exactly there as well. She's a very important part of his story, and which is why it's a shame that she's written out so often, because his story doesn't really exist without her. So, yeah.